What's up, guys? So today on the podcast, Eugene and I are going to hang out with you guys, and we're talking about the idea of developing new techniques through your training. And we talk about the idea of why quantity helps create quality in the game. And then we sort of go off in the weeds about sharing different ideas on how to develop new techniques. I even give a sort of the process that I personally go through anytime I'm working on a new technique or a new position, sort of a step-by-step process that I go through, which will be included on there. And then, of course, we go through the normal tangents that you guys are more than well aware of by this point. So again, thank you guys for joining us. All right, guys. So before I get into our normal sponsorships, I wanted to ask you guys, if you're enjoying this podcast, if you listen to it weekly and you're like, this is pretty cool, I kind of like it, I know a lot of you guys do enjoy it, then we would appreciate a review. If you guys have a second, just, you don't have to stop your car if you're driving or anything like that. But if you have a moment, it doesn't cost any money to do it. Whatever podcast program or whatever that you listen to the podcast on or watch it, just give us a review. And it'd be really helpful for the podcast. And maybe later on we can do some prizes or something with that. It'd be kind of fun. More on that later on. My brain's kind of swirling around there. But for the time being, if you guys want to throw us a review, maybe we'll read it on the next podcast just to see who did it. That said, big thanks to our sponsor, Charlotte's Web. So again, if you guys are training jiu-jitsu and you're probably like most of us where you experience some soreness in your muscle from inflammation related to your training. Also, probably sometimes I know some people struggle with their normal sleep cycles and stuff, be like from late training and whatever else. CBD has been one of those things where I've been a huge proponent of it after I felt its effects back in, it's been some years now. I originally started trying it as a balm early, I want to say it was in 2018. And then afterwards, I started using it as a tincture, and I was quickly sold on it. I remember personally, and again, this is anecdotal, this is my experience, yours can vary, because the thing about this stuff is when we were at that farm in Colorado checking out some of their stuff, one of the things they were saying is everybody's body responds differently to this stuff, but some of the effects that I've had have been really useful. One in particular was the effect of sore muscles. I had a couple of muscles that were always chronically sore up in my neck and stuff like that, my shoulders. And again, I can't say definitively that it was CBD, but I did notice that from using it around the same time, the muscles started to not flare up as much. And so again, it's one of those things where I take CBD. It seems to help me out both with my sport-induced inflammation that I have from training, and also it helps kind of to promote a better sleep cycle at night. So again, I take mine at nighttime. I tested out using one of the guys that we met at Charlotte's Web. He uses it before he does like some like serious work. He says it helps him focus. I tried that. My brain was like mush. I remember trying it. I was like, oh, this isn't happening. I just need to relax. So the effects that it has on me is it just chills me out, makes me want to relax. And so I use it before I go to sleep, and it works wonders. And again, if you guys would like to try it, go to their website at charlesweb.com. You can use a promo code Chewjitsu and save 15% on the order. And again, give it a whirl. I encourage people to try it for about a month to see what kind of effects it has on you. A lot of times when I give it to my students as a test run, it's like, try this out for a month, see what it does. A lot of times they end up buying more afterwards because they enjoy the effects. But again, it's one of those things where everybody's body responds differently to it. So both the dosage and the timing and all of that stuff can be different for everybody. So try it out and see what you think. But again, I would advise you to give it about a month before you decide to like go like all in or write it off, either way. Mm-hmm. Also, thanks to Epic Roll. Epic Roll is a BJJ gear and apparel company. Most of you guys know this. If you've watched any of my rolling videos in the recent months, you've probably seen some of their shorts and rash guards being used. And again, I'm a fan of them. And we're also going to be coming out with a new set of Jiu-Jitsu rash guards and shorts, with Epic Roll being the sort of designer and creator of them. More details on that later on. But again, I'm a big fan of all of their stuff from there. I'm actually right now, if you're watching the video of it, I'm wearing the Kimura Lock t-shirt, which is, again, a nice, simple t-shirt that essentially says Kimura Lock, and it gives a definition as to what it is. I went to the coffee shop yesterday morning, and I was wearing it. And again, I know maybe that sounds gross to you guys. I wear a t-shirt more than one in a day, but like I'm most of the time, I'm not actually doing anything in my t-shirts. I'm like training. I take my t-shirts off and everything else. So don't judge me. Uh, um, but I took it. I went to the coffee shop and I could see the woman when she was ringing me up for the coffee. She was staring and reading the shirt. So I'm always wondering, like, what do they think? What do they think about what's going on, like with this shirt? But again, if you guys want to check out any of their products or gear, go to their website at epicrollbjj.com. Promo code is Chewjitsu, and you save 15% on the order, and you support the podcast, of course. And thanks to our sponsor, Manscaped. Manscaped is the premier below the belt grooming company. They've got everything from trimmers, razors, colognes. I mean, everything. One of my buddies, Mike, shout out to Mike. He just recently bought a package of stuff from there. So I think he's excited about getting it. And I'll have to check on and see what his experience was with it. My experience was a good one. They became a sponsor earlier this, I guess, was it last year?
Yeah, last year. Yeah,
it's been a while. And they became a sponsor last year. And when we tried it, I wasn't too hip to it, because again, I'm like thinking ball trimmers, really? That's what I'm, again, there's a part of integrity to me that I'm like, I don't want to just push stuff that I don't believe in, So I was like, well, if they want to send something, we'll try it out. They send their products. All of their stuff smells amazing. The trimmer's excellent. Like, it's a really good trimmer, especially for the size. It's not massive. So it's very easy. Like, I can take it with me on trips and stuff like that. It's not like a big giant, like I've got like some real big corded like trimmers, and they're nice, but they're big and they're heavy. This trimmer is very lightweight. It charges up with a USB cord. And again, it's very, it's portable. So again, it's easy that I can take on trips, or it's easy to get into the shower, whatever, if I have to trim something off. And it's actually really good for not creating nicks and cuts, because Jess, my girlfriend, will use it to trim off my shoulder hair, because I get a bit fuzzy from time to time. And so she'll use it to shave off my shoulder hair, the tufts of fur on my back. And with the regular trimmer, she had a tendency to cut me sometimes. And so this one, it's got some sort of guard technology, so that doesn't happen. And again, I'm a big fan of everything that they've made that I've tried. And so it's all high quality stuff. And if you want to check out their stuff for yourself, or if you've got a man in your life that you would want to get some high quality products to, then go to manscaped.com, and the promo code is Chewjitsu20, and you'll save 20% on the order, and you get free shipping. And last but certainly not least, if you guys would like to join the Chew Crew email list, where I send you emails usually Monday through Friday, every now and then, sometimes on the weekend, but mostly through the week. And again, it's everything from jiu-jitsu tips, ideas. Sometimes there's general philosophical ideas that I have on stuff, the books that I'm reading. Sometimes we'll even make fun of trolls that I find on the internet that comment on my YouTube page, all kinds of different stuff. If you would like to join and get those emails, you can go to chewjitsu.net/join. And what I'll do is I'll send you a free set of ebooks. One is on a game plan, or developing your own game plan. So if you think it would be beneficial for you to have a game plan for your jiu-jitsu game, which I think it would be a good idea, then you can get that ebook, and I'll even show you my game plan that I use for competitions. Also, which it goes really well with this podcast, I have an ebook that's on drilling. It also comes with a free video, and it basically talks about how to go from passive states of drilling to active states of drilling, and how to train even if you don't have control of your class. For instance, if you're just a student and you don't have control of your gym, it'll show you how to develop techniques so that you can go through that even if you don't have that control. And again, that's available to you for free by joining. And then again, if for some reason you decide you don't want to get the emails anymore, you can always cancel by just clicking the unsubscribe button on the emails at any point, and you get to keep the ebooks for no charge. So you can get that at chewjitsu.net/join, JOIN. And guys, with all that said, let's jump into the podcast. All right. What's up, guys? So today we're going to do a podcast, kind of basically, at least start off, because you guys know how we are. We'll go off into tangents in a bit. But I'm reading a book right now. I forgot the name of it. It's stuck over there. But there was a story in the book that they were talking about. And again, I don't know the validity or the truth of the story, but there was a story about an art teacher running a pottery class. And essentially what happened was is the teacher had two groups, and, group A and group B. Or the teacher decided to grade group A on the total quantity of the work that they did. So for instance, if they did 50 pounds of pots, they'd get an A, 40 pounds B, 30 pounds, so on. Group B was graded solely of the quality of one piece of work. And the professor supposedly goes on to find that the students who produced more quantity also produced higher quality work by the end of the class. And again, whether or not that's even true or not, I don't know. But I think that jiu-jitsu, while it's not the same as molding clay, we do refine our techniques, and art, they might, take a piece of paint or a paintbrush and throw it across the canvas. We have movements across the mats. And so, there's an art side to jiu-jitsu. And I think just like the artist, there's a power in doing, instead of making a pile of crummy pots in order to make one really good one, we have countless failed attempts that we learn from until we finally make the technique click. And this is one of the reasons why anytime I'm trying to work on like a new position or new technique, I try to put myself there as much as possible. So as a coach, for instance, I will make my students work from the positions that we're working on that particular class. So for instance, we've been doing a lot of mount escapes this past week. Whenever we start the rolling off, before we get into the full rolls, I put people into those mount escape situations. And sometimes even if I'm focusing on something that the class isn't, or even back in the day when I didn't run the classes and I was trying to focus on something during the roll, I would just be very deliberate with it. And I would try to work in those positions. Another strategy was to go to open mats and basically focus on that position that I was working from. One instance, me and one of my friends would put me in side control, because at the time I struggled with side control escapes. I would put him in back mount because my back mount was good. He struggled with back mount escapes, and we would just basically cycle through. And the whole point of doing this is to give yourself more time in position, because that is essentially if you want to get to the quantity for us, the more time that we have in positions to figure things out, the more chances we get to mess things up, the more chances we get to just kind of see how things work, the more chances we give ourselves to create better quality in our game, right? To refine our techniques, to refine our positions, things like that. And that's an important idea because, again, mat time is really important. This is like one of the things where I've talked about this before. Long-term consistency trumps short-term intensity. A lot of times people like come into jiu-jitsu, or even they come back after an injury or whatever, and they just try to really push it. They end up getting injured, or they're exhausted or whatever. You'd be better served by being able to train consistently more often than being able to train more infrequently, but really intense when you do. And so that's just the idea to chew on to start this off today, is basically just, if you want to get better at a position, a technique, or whatever it might be, find ways to get more time in those positions, whether it be you just force yourself to do it during rolling, or you have an open mat or whatever, or if you teach a class. But more time in those positions allows you, again, to create more quality in your game via the quantity of time that you have.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like, initially thinking about that concept, you just think, well, I would just put out more stuff and it'd be less high quality work. But if you give yourself more reps, anything, repetition, you're giving yourself more repetition. With more repetition, it's essentially, you start to perfect. What's the rep that the arbitrary rep count that they give you, that they say to like learn a technique, like 1,000 or 10,000 or something like that?
10,000, yeah.
10,000, which is very different from, depending on your athletic ability, your level of focus, all that kind of stuff. But to me, initially, I was like, well, I'm going to put as much time into doing this thing as I can, and hopefully it's going to be more quality because I'm going to have more time to study it, pay attention to it. But also, you're not, on the other side, you're not getting the reps. So that's where it is. Even though you do more reps, you're going to almost like you're creating a groove. You're grooving, you're creating that groove, and your body just knows how to kind of fall into it. And like, there's less thinking involved. There's more kind of automaticity, there's more just like going, feeling, doing, and that's kind of, you're going to figure out also like, oh, well, I need to do this specific grip, or I need to modify this way. And you're going to do that kind of over trial and error.
Yeah, I think this is one of the reasons why it's good, if possible, to focus on like one position or one technique more than say a ton. You know, I mean, granted, there's always this thing where we're experimenting and trying stuff, but I think it was Hodger Gracie. I was watching a video of him speak at like a seminar, and he's like one of the best ever, right? One of the best ever. He says, you know, I can count the amount of techniques that I've mastered on one hand, right? Or like, or maybe it was two hands, something like that, right? On his fingers, he can count the techniques he's mastered. The rest of them, he knows them, but he's not mastered them. And I think that's an important idea, right? Like, it's not always, it's not about you having some magical technique that nobody knows about, right? Because the novelty of a new technique doesn't last very long. I mean, because you can see it, like if someone comes out with some new stuff during the Worlds or the ADCC, the next year, everybody's doing it, right? Everybody knows what it is because it happens so fast. So the novelty doesn't last long. But then there are guys that you'll watch that can do, I mean, day one jiu-jitsu. Hodger Gracie is a great example of this. Day one jiu-jitsu to people, and they can't stop it. Right? You know, they can just do it. I mean, for me, like, I use a double underpass, a double stack pass, and I have lots of variations and details to it, but I use that damn pass. And that's a day one. I learned, that was the very first pass I ever learned in jiu-jitsu. Now it looks different than when I did it back then, but it's a very basic pass. There's nothing fancy about it, but I've used it to pass a lot of really good guard players. Right. And you know, I was thinking about this. I was actually talking to one of the guys today. So we've got this really big football player that started training with us named Corey. Super cool dude. You know, I didn't ask him his weight, but I imagine he's somewhere in the 290, 300 pound range, right? He's a big guy. And he's learning the techniques and stuff. And he was talking about rolling with one of the smaller dudes in the gym today. And he was talking about how strong he felt. He was like, man, he's kind of weird strength, right? He's strong, but he's kind of different. He's not like muscular, right? And I was talking about this, and I think this is something that we don't think about. That I pause whenever I see the little spin wheel, so I don't know if that's the right thing to do.
It does.
Okay. But strength really does play a huge role in jiu-jitsu, not from the standpoint that we think of as like squeezing someone or whatever, but we have to develop weird muscle groups in weird ways that honestly don't get developed in other day-to-day life exercises, right? I mean, you can think of it this way, like a baby. If I was to give a small toddler this coffee mug, right, or his coffee cup, and tell them to like hold it and wave it around and everything else, they don't have the strength and dexterity and muscular control to do that. Their like hands are floppy and they drop it, right? We've seen that. But as a human or as an adult, we get that. You can even think about walking, right? I mean, if someone has an issue with like, you know, where they're not able to get up and move around for a while and they experience atrophy in the legs, and it's like, oh my God, like just walking can be a chore when most of the time we can do it without even thinking. And so there's a lot of weird movements in jiu-jitsu that require a certain level of strength to be developed. And I think about like the importance of getting those reps in develops the strength. So for instance, like the giggler sweep that I use from half guard, that uses a really weird muscle, like with the way you use your hamstring to scoot underneath and everything else. And you're using your hips. It's a weird muscle group and it's a weird muscular pattern to memorize. And so you've got to develop the strength with those small muscles as you're developing that muscle memory, right? Like basically your, I don't know what you would call it, but basically the muscular recruitment patterns, where basically the body's saying, hey, we need these three muscles to fire at the same time as this is happening. You know, that takes a little while to develop, and it's not something that happens overnight. I think that's an important thing that a lot of people don't think about. You know, they think about like technique, right? I need to be more technical. What does that even mean, technique, being technical, or even timing? You know, a lot of times we're talking about the muscles firing at the right times and developing the muscle memory, and even the right type of strength to effectively hit a technique in the most, you know, technical or finesse-like way possible.
Yeah. I think like if you take that smaller jiu-jitsu athlete and that big football player guy, right? You're talking about hamstring, like the hamstring strength, for example, or even you. He's probably bigger. I mean, I assume he's maybe stronger than you are.
Oh, I mean, if we were to go over to the weight room, he would move way more weight than me.
So here's the thing, though. So if you guys went and you guys did hamstring curls, resisted hamstring curls, I'm just using that as an example. He probably could hamstring curl on a machine more weight than you could. 100%. However, he probably would not be as strong or as effective in that. Just there is technique involved. Don't get me wrong, a lot of technique there. But the other thing is strength and positions.
Right.
There was a book on hand strength, gripping strength that I was like reading about. Just that there's all these weird drills and stuff. And one of the things, using a gripper, they're talking about using a gripper in like different angles with your arm extended across the body. So think about like pulling, right? If you're doing a regular rowing motion, you're in this nice upright position. You're not really sitting on your butt or sitting on your at an angle on your hip, trying to do like a drag, like a collar drag type. So it's a different way to develop strength and positions, and almost like your body can sometimes feel like it's dumb. Like, I'm strong, I can do this movement really well, but it's so not used to activating the muscles in a specific position that's conducive to jiu-jitsu. That's where you kind of get, a lot of it's technique, don't get me wrong, but also strength is required when you're going, techniques is equal. So
yeah, I think that it's like almost as if you're, if you're a strong person, right, and you start training jiu-jitsu, then it becomes this game of, or this process rather, of understanding how to, and again, you don't always do this consciously. A lot of people, like, we value our thoughts and our ideas and all this stuff, but a lot of times it happens on just a sort of a subconscious, just by happenstance basis, where you're training and you start to figure out how to use that strength that you have from the weight room or from whatever into the jiu-jitsu space by practicing, doing repetitions, and essentially allowing your body to figure out, okay, how do I use these lat muscles when I'm off on the side of my hip, and I'm going to use my bicep, my lat, and these forearm muscles all at the same time. And then, it's like this, it's a new pattern for the body to memorize, and so that's super important. And that's why sometimes you can have guys that will feel incredibly strong on the mats, but then in the weight room, they're nothing. It's like they have grappler strength. Their muscles have been developed for that. Which again is not a bad thing. I'm a big proponent of strength training, but again, everybody's rolled with the guy in their gym at some point, or even in a competition where you rolled with a dude and you're looking at him and you're like, that guy's not strong. And then you roll with him, and you're like, oh my God, this guy's so strong, and he can be skinny and whatever, but they're tough.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, like carryover from the weight room to the gym or to the mats and vice versa. It's a little bit unique in that way that I think they're both helpful, but necessarily like they don't always completely translate one versus the other.
Right.
And so like it's good to strength train for other reasons. Obviously that some of that does help, but it's also good to strength train for injury prevention's sake and to keep your body, in good shape and things like that. But those are always interesting conversations to have. I mean, of course it's helpful. Don't get me wrong. Of course it's helpful. And also if you're someone that's an athlete, it's almost like your brain is wired. Like you're already wired to learn patterns for pattern recognition, techniques, sequences. You have better coordination. So even if you haven't played, even if you're a football player coming into jiu-jitsu versus just a regular weightlifter, I think the football player that's in decent shape is probably going to do a little better at getting the positions and getting the techniques down.
Generally, I mean, like I've seen as a coach where if I've got to teach two people, one person is a former athlete in the sport, seems to be irrelevant. I mean, if they wrestled, they seem to be a little bit, it's a bit more natural to do jiu-jitsu. But it's like if I'm teaching how to shrimp, as an example, teaching how to do basic movement patterns on the mats, the sport seems to be irrelevant. If they've done a sport, if they're an athlete, I can teach them how to shrimp, no problem. New guy who maybe isn't very athletic and maybe he's been kind of a bit of a couch potato a good chunk of their life, it's a little bit more difficult for him. Now that said, that kind of goes into what you were kind of talking about before the show, which is from that book you're reading about, like not judging yourself and not being so judgmental about where you're at.
Yeah.
Because again, that's a big problem is like, people will come in and like, let's say if you get those two guys, one guy's shrimping his way down the mat, no problem. And because he's an athlete, the new guy who's not, struggling and then feels like something's wrong with him because he can't do it. And it's not that there's anything wrong with him. It's just that dude's been training in some fashion for a lot longer than you have. So, you've got your own path to go down, and it's just going to take a little bit longer for you to do some of the same things that these people get a little bit easier.
Well, and here's another thing, how do you deal with failed attempts? If you're someone that comes in, if you're someone that's used to kind of failure in a way, like, oh, well, this is just par for the course for me. If you're used to not necessarily failure, but having a hard time catching on versus somebody that's an elite athlete or a high level athlete, and you come into this sport like jiu-jitsu, you're going to have this ego that like, you're supposed to be good. Like you came from wrestling, right? And you start doing jiu-jitsu, you're like, I'm going to be a blue belt right away, right off the bat. I should be mopping the floor with people. And so there's that ego, right? And you expect these accolades, and you expect to be better than you are. And I think sometimes when you're looking at skill acquisition, dealing with failed attempts, and I'll ask you that in just a second, but dealing with like failure or not performing as well, I think that sometimes can be hindering because you're judging yourself and you're like, well, shit, nobody can watch me fail or should see me fail or get submitted by this skinny white belt or whatever. I should be better than them. Yeah. So I think like, there's another side to it. Like if you're this couch potato, maybe your skill acquisition isn't as fast, but you're not afraid to try because you're kind of used to dealing with these bumps and bumps in the road.
Yeah, this is true. This is the thing. There is a point in time, right, where I'll say it like this. A lot of times people treat their day-to-day training almost as if it's a test. You know what I mean? Where they're going to fail or they fail or they succeed, they win, they lose. The day-to-day training is typically, I consider it more like the lab, right? Where you're experimenting. That's really what it is. You're trying stuff out. And you have to understand that there are times where, yes, it's going to be a win or a lose, right? Like for instance, I don't believe in participation trophies. So like if you go to a competition, you're either going to win or you lose, right? And I know that people try to church it up with like, oh, you win, you learn, right? You don't lose. Like, you lose. And it's okay to lose sometimes. I mean, that's the biggest problem, is that for some reason we act as if it's not okay to fail or lose. And so we don't even want to come to grips with the fact that we lost. Like, no, I didn't lose. I learned something. No, you lost. That's okay. It's okay to lose sometimes because losing stings. And it's that sting that makes you take notice to pay attention next time. Because like when you win, you won. You're like, nothing to change. Everything's great, right? But when you lose, you're like, oh shit, I did something wrong. Huh.
Yeah. It's painful.
I need to fix that. Yeah. It's like, for instance, if you touch the stove and the stove's not hot, no big deal. You'll probably touch the stove again. You touch that damn stove and it's hot, you're not touching it again because you're like, I need to learn a lesson.
Yeah.
And so I think that, it's not about acting as if failure doesn't happen, but it's not about taking it personally. So you can learn from it. You got to be able to view it and learn from it. And instead of looking at that sting that you have as a negative thing, use it as motivation. For instance, when people get nervous before competitions, you could look at it as bad. Oh, I'm nervous. Or you could look at it as, this is like my body getting ready for something big. I think, if I'm correct, I feel like I read somewhere where they did a study and they basically had people reframe the way that they thought about performance, the pre-match anxiety, pre-match jitters. And because the body doesn't really disseminate stress very well. And so it's just stimulated, right? And so they had these people interpret that stress as a good thing, and they seem to perform better from it rather than looking at it as a negative thing. I know for me, like as I got older, I started to embrace that nervousness that comes from the tournament because, it only comes when I'm getting ready to compete. And, if I sort of go with it, I end up doing better than I compete better now than I roll in the gym. It used to be the other way. I rolled in the gym better than I did when I competed. Now it's the opposite. And I think a part of that is because I've embraced that nervousness that comes up.
How did you do that?
I think not taking losses personally. Because again, I think it's one of these things where when you feel like you have something on the line and you can't possibly lose, you can't lose, whatever, you get really nervous about possibly losing, right? It's like something, it's like, what is it? Like Carl Jung said, what you resist persists, so you're resisting this loss, right? And in turn you create problems for yourself, right? So I remember there were multiple times where I had opportunities to win matches, but I wouldn't go for them because I was thinking about what if I do that? What if? And I hamstrung myself to really win. And then as I got older, and honestly, I attribute it to some of the meditation stuff that I've done, where you just really look at your stuff and be like, why am I so worried about this? This is bullshit. This is all mental bullshit, right? And you just become aware of it. And then it was like became fun. I'm having fun competing, and I'm just bouncing around and I'm trying stuff. And if it doesn't work, well, who cares? Like, I'll lose a match. So what? I've lost plenty of matches. Like, you just become free from it, and it allows you to have a lot more fun. And because of that, I think that then you're in this heightened state of arousal from the pre-match jitters and everything else, and the pre-match energy that you're getting. But then at the same time, you're not hamstrung by the fear of going for something. So it's this nice middle ground. And so I think that's where I kind of hit my stride with that stuff as far as competing goes. And a big thing was, just like in the gym, you kind of lose your attachment over, the happenings. They just are what they are. I don't take them personally. If I lose a round during the gym, or I get submitted, or if I go to a competition and get submitted, I don't suck at jiu-jitsu. I just lost. Happens, right? I just failed at something. It happens sometimes. It all happens to all of us. I'll just learn from it and fix it. But I think that when I was younger, especially when I used to struggle with this, my big issue was I took it all personally. If I lost, I sucked at jiu-jitsu. My day was ruined, and I would run around being upset about it. Whereas when I got older and a little bit wiser, I didn't take it so personally.
You judge yourself. I think you're, you really, that's the thing. That book I read it's called The Inner Game of Tennis. It talks about learning and things like that. So like one thing before, I actually played tennis growing up, and it's very mental. It's a very mental game. It's a game of like highs and lows. You could be on a roll with, you see some of these guys are 5'3" or 5'1", they end up losing 7-5 or whatever. Yeah. It's just like, it's all mental at that point. Like, and so I think I was just thinking about like focus. So your focus was not on the past. Oh, I lost before. It was on the future. What happens if I lose? It was on the present. It wasn't like, I'm going to go out there and do my thing, and I'm not going to judge myself regardless of the outcome. And so you were able to maintain focus, and you weren't wasting energy on thinking about what was going on over here before, what's going to happen, what could potentially happen. You're kind of focused on what you're getting ready to do. And you brought up meditation for that. And like the other thing is, what's more present than your breath in the moment, like breathing and focusing on your breath. That's a great way. That's what they talk about, breathing is like, you keep hearing it over and over as a way to focus and kind of ground yourself. And I think the breathing is like something you do in the present moment. If you think about what you're doing right then and there, focusing on your breath, you're going to be present. You're going to be able to, kind of maintain that focus in a way. But you are correct. Like, I think it's especially one of the hardest things for me at black belt is not judging myself if I have a bad round or I don't do as well, because pretty much the majority of the students are not black belts. Yeah. They're brown or lower. So there's pretty much, you're there. If they get you, you're their achievement. You're like their, head on a stick. You know what I'm saying? If you get them, who gives a shit? It doesn't matter. So it's one of those things. That's one of the things you struggle with. Like I struggle with as a black belt is like, well, people are coming after me now. And if they get me, well, do I suck? Am I still good? Am I still deserving? All those questions. And I think like you have to think about for me, I think about how long have I been doing this and, where I've come from and how much better I've gotten and the level I've gotten to. And it's almost like, it's like you look at your whole body of work, right? Years and years of being on the mats, and, you're going to have hiccups here and there, of course. And I think black belt can be a rebirth in a way. We talked about that, like kind of starting over, because you've already accomplished like the belt. That is an accomplishment, achievement. Now from there, there's no more belts to accomplish. We talked about, obviously coral belts and stuff that, and stripes and rankings like that. But I think that being able to let go of that ego, especially a black belt, is freeing and allows you to kind of explore and get even better.
Yeah, it's interesting. Two things you said there. So, the breathing part, I really believe that if you can control your breath and learn to be mindful of it, it can really be like mastery over self. Because, for instance, like I cannot possibly be angry if I'm breathing like this. like nice and controlled. I can't be angry there. Like if I'm angry, like and my body's going to be tense. If I'm breathing in, I'm just relaxed, bro. Even just doing that now, I'm starting to slow down a little bit. I can feel it. I feel good. Whereas what happens typically when we're angry is like you can feel the chest rise and you just feel your chest breathe, your shallow breathing, right? It's these kinds of things. And so your breathing is such an interesting thing that when you learn how to control it and manipulate it through different practices, you can ramp yourself up. You can bring yourself down. You can put yourself into whatever state you need to be in or want to be in at that time, right? Like there's times where, like for instance, I was talking to my students this weekend, the guys at the gym, and I was talking especially to the new ones. I said, hey, listen, don't just be like when you're in the mount escapes, right? Mount's a tough position. Be mindful of controlling your own headspace just as much as controlling your techniques, and also be mindful of your breath. Because when you're in like places like mount and back mount, side control, and you're on the bottom of those, every bad breath that you take and you're like panicking breath you're taking, your energy meter is going down the tubes. And as that goes down, it gets worse and worse and worse from those positions. And so you've got to be in control of your headspace. And I think the breath is one of the more powerful ways to do that. And as I've talked about in videos and on this podcast before, there's been times where I've been angry and I can feel the anger coming up and me wanting to lash out at someone. And I notice it and I'm like, all right, take a breath and relax a little bit. Now, granted, I'm not perfect and I still have my frumpy moments, but if I can find my breath in those moments, I tend to not be angry. I tend not to be lash out. I kind of can look at things a little objectively. My breath gives me a moment to like, okay, relax. Even through like sometimes anxiety, same thing. If I get anxious about something, if I can find my breath during those moments, I can sort of distance myself from whatever is happening and then say, okay, how do I want to feel about the situation? And what am I going to do about it? The other thing you were talking about was getting submitted and your struggle with it. I think I used to be like really, really bad about not wanting to get submitted. I would fight submissions off left and right, and I hated getting submissions done to me. I think this changed when there was a period. I can't remember if I was a black or a brown belt at the time, but I was injured at the time. And I've talked about this before. This is how I developed my defense and how my defense got so darn good. I couldn't bridge off of my leg and my knee was kind of tweaked. And so it just didn't feel good to get it caught up in positions. And so what I did was I literally, like when I would roll with people, I would just lay on my back and I would ball up my hands really tight. And all I would do is sit there and defend submissions. Now I knew that eventually they were going to submit me, but I just sort of delayed the inevitable. And I remember the first couple of days of that, actually the first day or two, I struggled with getting submitted, right? Like someone would submit me and like, it would make me mad, but like I didn't have the drive to come back up and do anything else again. And I still wanted to roll. So I was like, just suck it up. And then you kind of realize like getting submitted doesn't matter. I'm trying to develop something here. And then when I came back later on, after my knee had healed up, I came back and my defense was like off the charts better because I was so good at defending with just my arms and not even being able to escape that I was much harder to submit and I was much easier to escape. It was much easier to escape for me. It was like completely different. And so then it was like, it kind of, an idea clicked in my head, like, oh, here's what happens if we sometimes allow ourselves to learn a little bit rather than always trying to win. Like we can figure new stuff out. And that was another moment where I kind of had like a light bulb or whatever, looking back on it. At the time, I don't think I really realized, but looking back on it, that was definitely a light bulb moment for me with this kind of stuff.
I've had some interesting situations in tournaments, and even when I was playing soccer, when I would be sick. If I would be sick and like the chances of me playing were kind of up in the air.
Yeah.
And so if I was like not feeling great and I'd go and I'd compete, or I'm just coming off of an illness, recovering, coming back, I'd do better. I did that numerous times on the jiu-jitsu mats because I really was like, well, here it is. Like I'm here. I'm going to do this thing. I don't expect to do well. I don't have expectation. I'm not putting pressure on myself. I just go out there and I do it. It doesn't always turn out well for me because sometimes I'm not in the best shape and I get a little tired. But for the most part, like when I go into a situation, I'm like, oh, well, whatever. It doesn't mean I'm not confident, but I'm not like almost like I'm like, all right, if I lose, it's not a big deal. And so I think I've done better. And I think a lot of, for me personally, like is the pressure I put on myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like that's the my big issue is my mental aspect. It's not usually physically. I've always been, in decent shape, pretty athletic, so I think that mental side of the thing, even being able to go for submissions, kind of go out of your comfort zone, do some things that maybe you will get submitted and things like that. I think that mindset and that not having expectations of like, well, just not forcing yourself into a corner. Like, well, if I lose, then this is it. I'm a terrible person and I suck at jiu-jitsu,
Well, you're an overthinker.
Absolutely.
You're very much an overthinker, which has its pros and cons as a person, right? Everything has its pros and cons, right? Me, I tend to sometimes underthink sometimes, which can be a benefit in some cases and a detriment in others. But I know what you're talking about, because I know for me, like some of my best wins as a white belt, for instance, I had some really good wins as white belt where I beat guys that were way better than me. Like, and the one that I've talked about the most in this situation was I beat a purple belt at a competition. I was a white belt, been training jiu-jitsu. There was about a 6-month layoff, but I mean, a little less than a year, like if you actually want to get into like real combined jiu-jitsu time, maybe like 6 months, if we're being generous. And then I had my wrestling, and I went and competed against a purple belt in this first round of this particular competition. It was funny. They took, I didn't know this at the time. They took all the different white, blue, and purple belts essentially, and they combined them together in a no-gi division. And so I had a knack for, I don't know, this curiosity, to go around and just chat with guys. Like a lot of times when we would get ready to compete against each other, and as a white belt, I would just run around and talk to everybody. Like, hey man, where are you guys from? Where you been training at? Whatever. Oh, cool, man. That's awesome. See you out there. Like I would know the guys that I was competing against before I even competed against them. And I remember at this one, it was so funny. I was like talking, I was like, how long you been training? Like we're all like warming up. How long you been training, man? 5 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years. I'm like, oh, and they're, how long you been training? Like 5 months, like, I mean, it's like, I didn't have much going on. So I'm thinking, oh, this ain't gonna be good. And the first match, I remember going up there, and there was a guy who I found this out later. He had taken second at Pans as a blue belt, taken silver at Pans the year before. He's a purple belt at this point, and he had been training for 6 years. And he comes out, remember smiling, and I told him, I was like, don't hurt me too bad today, because I'm thinking he's about to whoop my butt. By the way, I was wearing a wrestling singlet, just to let you guys know, to give you a mental picture, because back in the day, like they didn't have, like, he had on MMA, he had on like fight shorts and a t-shirt, and I had on a singlet. The type of no-gi gear that was available to everyone was very sparse back then. Mm-hmm. And he ended up, I took him down, got 2 points. He put me in a knee bar. I escaped the knee bar, He like swept me. I kicked him away, got back up. I ended up beating him like 6-2, and I was like, man, I beat a purple belt today. Like, that's a feather in my cap. And I think a big thing is that going into that match, like once I realized that I was going up against him, there was no pressure to win because I knew I was going to lose, right? I had become okay with the idea of failure, that it didn't bother me. It didn't hinder me anymore. And then in the very next match, it flipped around where I went up against another purple belt, about 6 years, 8 years of training under his belt. And then I started to think about, man, if I beat that first purple belt, maybe I can beat this one. And then the idea of failing didn't seem so like foregone, like a foregone conclusion. Mm-hmm. And I got my own head. And then I started to worry. And then I got hamstrung. And again, it may have not changed the overall outcome,
sure,
but I know in my headspace it changed things. Hell, this was even recently. I remember 2018. I was at that Nogi, the ADCC trials. I literally signed up. I signed up for the ADCC trials 2 weeks before. Right, I was just like me and one of my students, Pabon. We were sitting there. It was like on a Tuesday night, and he basically was like, "Stop being a punk and go sign up." I was like, "Okay." So I went and signed up, and when I competed, I literally had no expectations. I was like, man, let's see what happens. I remember, I won my first match pretty quickly. My next match was up against Devontae, and it was a brutal match that went into overtime. I was exhausted, and I was like, the damn thing could have gone either way.
It was like judge's decision, I think.
It was the judge's decision. They gave it to me because I had more takedown attempts, but I mean, it was as razor thin as you could get.
Yep.
And then I won 2 more matches, and then I ended up in the semifinals. I was like, oh shit, I'm in the semifinals, and I went against Tim Spriggs, and Tim Spriggs had beat me before.
Yeah.
And and now and again, Tim Spriggs is a monster, and I don't think that that day, I don't think that the outcome of the match would have been any different. I think I could have given him a better run, but I think he would have gotten me one way or the other. But I remember going into that match thinking, okay, if I win this one, I'm in the finals. Then that started to get in my head. I slipped up, and I did not. I remember the state. The state went from like the other 5 matches or whatever it was. I was just going. Like I was just going, and whatever was happening was happening. This match, I went in, I was like, okay, I'm going to try to play smart. I'm going to try to, the other matches, I was not playing smart. I was going for the kill. All of my matches but one went to a submission that day. All the ones that I won, I had like 4 submissions out of 5 matches. I go against Tim, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to play smart, and I'm going to do, it's not the best place for my mind to be in. And he freaking caught me in a guillotine choke super quick. And I remember I get off the mat, and I'm pissed at myself, not because I got caught in a guillotine, because my mind changed.
Yeah.
I lost the mindset of being in the present, right? And so then they were like, basically they were setting up the consolation finals, and I walk off the mat, I'm pissed, and they're like, hey, do you need more time to rest? And I said, no, let's get this going. I was like, I need to get rid of this. I need to clear my head with another match. And then my last match, I ended up winning it with submission pretty quickly, but again, just an example, like as a black belt, I'm not free from this either, right? We're all doing the best we can and dealing with the mindset struggles. We get a little bit better at it, I guess, with experience, but we still struggle with it.
How do you feel like if somebody's learning a position, or even just having struggles with competition, how do you deal with failed attempts? What's kind of the process? Maybe you could tell people, maybe tell yourself when you're going through this stuff, like having failed attempts, maybe in competition, or when you're learning a new technique like butterfly. We talked about one of your great positions that you work as a butterfly guard, developing that. What was your process, and what do you encourage people like to kind of work on, not get discouraged when you're trying to, advance your technique?
Well, let's talk about like discouragement, then we'll talk about process.
All right.
Discouragement. Well, I mean, it's like this: learn from it, and don't necessarily be upset about like the sting that you get from not succeeding. Embrace it. It's just part of the road, but don't take it personally, regardless of what ever it is. If you lose, just dust it off and just get back up and do it again. Look at it as something that happens rather than something that, you define yourself as, right? Because again, humans are so interesting. We're constantly in a state of becoming something new, right? Like we're always in a change. I mean, our cells are constantly replicating. Yeah. As people, we're constantly in flux and changing. Nothing about us is static. So we're constantly in a state of becoming something new. And so on the mats, you're in that process of making yourself new through your game and through your training. And so just because you failed today doesn't mean you're going to be a failure. It means you just failed today, because if you get up and train tomorrow, it's going to happen. And again, one of the keys to being persistent is not taking the rough stuff too personally, because it's really hard to be persistent for a long period of time, which is what you're going to need for jiu-jitsu and pretty much anything else that's worthwhile in your life. If you're constantly, dwelling on any bad thing that happened to you or anything that you did that was stupid, right? Like you just kind of have to dust it off your shoulder and keep moving forward, and see and basically do what you can. Whatever has happened has happened. Yeah. Now, as far as the process goes, here's the process that we'll go through that I tend to go through. One is I find entries into the position. Entries into the position is super, super important. If you cannot get to the position, you can't do it. I mean, that's it. And if you think about jiu-jitsu as in general, when we are competing against someone or we're rolling against someone, our job is to make the person play in the position that best suits us versus them, right? That is the goal. Just like I'm a military history geek. And when you look at military history, I mean, there's always this battle for making the enemy fight on the terrain of your choosing. And so that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to make people play your positions. Next, after you've got your entries, I try to figure out how to simply hold the position. Like when I'm rolling, I don't even, like, if I'm trying to play around a position, I'll see if I can just hold on to the darn thing. It's like, for instance, when I started playing full guard as a white belt, I found that the longer that I could hold full guard without getting passed, the more opportunities I had to try sweeps, and the more opportunity, or the more chances I actually had to try to actually make it succeed. And so using that, anytime I like do something, I try not to focus too hard on the cool move yet. I focus on, can I just keep them here? This is like one of the drills that we'll do at the gym sometimes, where if we're working on a guard position, we'll do the no pass drill, where basically the bottom person will try to hold the position and sweep, and then the top person will simply try to balance and defend, but they won't pass. And what this is doing is just simply trying to give that person more time in the position and understanding the controls of how it works. And a lot of that, the feeling of momentum and the movement and the way that your body feels in those positions, that can only come through time and training. That's not something I can tell you. It's something you have to experience and feel. Yep. That's super important. After we have that, then we can get into actually trying out sweeps and submissions and whatever else we might be using. And with that, then we start trying out the attacks. Now, once we start using attacks, I look for trends. And what I mean by trends is, a lot of times it tends to be this way. There tends to be only so many different ways that people will defend a technique or a movement, right? And what you do is you become very aware of those. Sometimes you'll become aware of those and you're not like really thinking about it. You start to do something, and all of a sudden you look back afterwards and you're like, oh wow, this thing that I've been doing is working. Oh, I didn't even realize what I was doing. You just did it because it felt right. It worked. But then later on you notice it. So you can do it unconsciously sometimes, or consciously you can look at it and be like, man, every time they grab my knee, it's crushing my guard. So for instance, I remember when Adam was getting really good with his double knee passing. You know, I remember years ago when we gave him his purple belt, he was like, if he grabbed a hold of my knees, he was passing my guard.
Oh yeah.
And so I was like, okay, every time he grabs my knees, he's passing my guard. So my hands come in front of my knees so he can't get his double knee grips, right? I'm going to defend that. And because I noticed that every time we rolled, that was the trend. He would grab my knee, he would pass, I would have to escape and get to half guard and then just get the sweep. So I had to stop the knee grips. And so you can be very aware of the trends that are happening and try to be conscious of it. And this is one of the important reasons why you can't do the boohoo, oh, I had a bad day at the gym kind of attitude, because if you do, you lose sight of what you could learn from it, right? Because if you're too focused on why you suck and why you had a bad day and all that self-deprecating garbage, then you lose sight of, well, what did they do? What could I have done to change things? And that's why you have to be clear of that mindset. And so that tends to be my process for it, you know. And again, this is not something where I have like a checkbox where I'm going, okay, I've got my entries now. It's just something you naturally grow through, where the more you can get there, the more time you can hold the position, the more opportunities you have. And then the more times you try stuff, you'll start to figure out that they do certain things to defend it. And through trial and error, you find out how to counter that. And that's really where people develop systems. You know, most people like who have been training for a long time have some systemized process to their game where, you know, they go from I go to A, and if they do this, then I do B, and if they do this, I do C. You know, you have this sequence of attacks that you develop, and this is kind of the way that happens.
Yeah, I agree. It's a progression. I think everybody learns a little bit differently, and a lot of times, you know, from those failures, those little failures, I think is where that's where I learn the most, is if I have, like, you know, some kind of failure from a position. But you also know what you need to work on. And if you're a newer person to jiu-jitsu, like, that's where you can tell your coach, like, I know you hate the question of like, what do I need to work on? Well, like, you can simply say, I'm having trouble with this thing. And it can give your coach like, oh, let's see it. Let's put you in the position. Oh, you're doing this. Let's modify this way. It's a great way to streamline your game as well, because you're going to do a lot of the guesswork. You're going to get yourself into a couple spots where you're not having success. And that's where your coach, who has knowledge, you know, extensive knowledge of this position, can show you exactly what you're doing wrong and how to get better. So I think getting out there, playing around, and you know, for me, like watching video of, like, I'll research a position, you know, if it's butterfly or anything, like I'll research it, I'll watch it, I'll try to implement a couple key things like a grip. I'll try to find one or two things that maybe I can take away, because if you are learning a new submission, for example, and you try to just replicate the whole thing, and you're going to be robotic, it's not going to feel natural, and you're probably going to miss a lot of key steps. So finding a few things and going out there and playing with it and trying to get into it, then you can have some success there, and you can actually find out where you're struggling, I think, get better.
Oh yeah, yeah, and that's the thing. If you're going to ask your coach about what they need to do or what you need to do to get better, you got to give them something specific.
Yeah, give them some work with. Yeah,
asking someone, it's like asking a plumber, or it's asking like someone like with your car. Hey, what's wrong with my car? but you haven't said, hey, there's a knock in my engine, and every time I do this, it does like that. Could give them something, right? Something wrong with my car. What's wrong with it? Right? Like it's so hard for us because jiu-jitsu is problem solving, and coaches are problem solvers, right?
Yeah.
Because coaches then become problem solvers for their students, where, you know, like I'll watch the guys move and I'm like, man, we need some mount escapes. So let's do mount escapes. Or man, we need to work on our guard passing. So let's do that. You know, and then when someone comes to me and they say, I have a problem, if they can show me what they're having a problem with, I can give them something. You know, this is like when I'm walking around the class and I'm watching people try the techniques, I can see what kind of problems they're having. Oh, stop right there. Make this adjustment right here. Very easy. A really good time to sort of reflect on this is after training, when you're walking, driving, whatever you do to get home, or if you're really close to the gym, like when you get home, take 10 minutes or so by yourself and just chill and sort of in your mind, debrief yourself of what happened. I know that when me and my buddy used to train together, and we lived together, we would kind of reflect on what happened that night at training and almost debrief each other. When we stopped living together, I still did the same thing when I would be driving home. And it's a nice time to right after training, where you're basically just letting your mind decompress. You know, you turn on some chill music or whatever and just drive home or whatever it is you're doing, and then replay the rolls that happened that day and try to think of something that happened that day that you could then get better at tomorrow. You know, and that's something that I would do all the time, where it's like, oh, that you know, that was something I could improve upon. Like last year, for instance, when I was working on my shotgun armbar, I remember it seemed like every day that it would work, the next day that I would try it, someone would defend it. And then I would be in my head, okay, how could I counter that particular defense? You know, then I'd come in the next day or something and maybe I'd have an answer. And then someone would do something else. Okay, now I got to find a new solution to the problem, right? But those little times where you have that time to like for instance, when I come home now, I'm a little bit closer to the gym than I used to be. And so when I come home, I tend to take a little bit of time by myself when I get home and just try to relax and just try to think about everything that happened during the day, debrief myself a little bit and kind of just reflect on it, and then think about what I can do for tomorrow, especially if I'm training with a purpose at the time. Like sometimes I'm not training with a purpose. Sometimes I'm just coming into the gym and I'm just training because I'm having fun. Right. You know, because deliberate training is kind of exhaustive. It can really exhausting. It can wear you out because mentally you're very focused, and that takes up a lot of mental energy, where sometimes it's fun to just come in the gym and just all right, let's just move around a little bit and see what happens.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to have that variety as well, because I think you got in that some of the development of technique is to have play. You know, you play and tinker. And I think if you're very much, you got to find that balance, because if you're very much goal oriented or specifically trying to achieve something, you're going to kind of be really focused on that. And it's not always the most fun. Like sometimes it's just fun to move around and get into some scrambles and go for some silly positions maybe you're not the best at, and just to create some scrambles and some fun that way. So I think having both on the other side, like we talked about, if you're just going out there and you have no intentions at all during your training, you're just going out there and just doing shit, you're going to feel like you're not getting anywhere. And more than likely you're not, because you're not spending enough time focusing on specific thing to improve. So I think maintaining that balance. And to your point about the mount positioning and working mounts. So I always enjoy coming to Tuesday night when you're running. And then I take bits and pieces of what you do and what I like, and I put that into my class, and just like, ooh, like, because I feel like I'm a little selfish in that way. Like, ooh, this helps me the most. Like maybe somebody it'll help them as well. Like for example, we did the positional, but you said if you're starting mount, you just keep mount unless you get to the back.
Yeah.
Me personally, like I'm not the best, especially if you're with a bigger person. It's hard to get your legs around them and like really get a good squeeze. I hate mount with I'm coming off a mount. I'm like floating off going to the side control. So it forced me really to like stay in that position against opponents that probably wouldn't keep it. And you're going to get, thrown off a little bit. And so that was a cool thing. Like I think doing it that way was helpful to me, just forcing that, positions and staying there without a ton of risk of, you're just going to reset. It's not like you're going to be stuck in a bad position for the rest of the time period. So,
right. Yeah. I mean, and that's a thing too, as far as coaches, sometimes that's where it comes from, is we teach like the things that we learned, right? Like we teach the things that we struggled with and the stuff we overcame, and we're sharing it because it's like, if we're having trouble with it, or we had trouble with it, someone in our class is probably going to have trouble with it. So, hey, this might help you out a little bit. I mean, that's where, a lot of the videos and a lot of the things that I share, a lot of it comes from simply my experiences. Like, hey, this is what worked for me. Here's something that might work for you. It may not, but it's something that you can draw upon. It's when you're having a coach, it allows you to sort of, just like, for instance, if we've got to look something up on Google, right, or the internet, because you could go to DuckDuckGo if you want to. I do. But yeah, I've got like the Brave app or whatever for web browsing and stuff like that. But the big tech scares me. But with that, the situation where you have the internet at your fingertips, you have this like maximizer of information. You have a question, you can literally put it into the internet and you will get an answer. Well, sometimes it's like that with coaches, where they can maximize the available information that you have at your disposal. Because if you were trying to learn it all yourself, it'd be very difficult. But then you've got this thing with this database of information stored in their skulls that they can say, hey, this is something that'll probably happen. When you do this particular move, this person's probably going to do this. And they can give you information and help you, have a better understanding of what could possibly happen before you even run into those situations.
Yeah. It streamlines your training, gets you, I think having a good coach is invaluable, and especially coaches that are different in their learning styles or teaching styles, I think is helpful too, because, some people you're not going to learn from you will learn from them, but they don't, maybe it's not the best learning style for you.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of a cool thing, having different coaches and bouncing ideas off training partners. Like one thing we didn't really touch on, but if I'm working a new position and I'm going against, someone of my similar skill level, we usually try to help each other out. Like, man, that was really good that you did this thing. Like, or they'll tell you, hey, here's something maybe you can try. And then you go down a whole other rabbit hole. And that's kind of fun too. But then you can discover a lot more and get better that way as well. So don't just rely on your coaches. If you have training partners of similar skill level, I'm not saying go ask a white belt that's brand new, and that sometimes happens. But so I think somebody of your similar skill level, or even, better than you are, or higher skill levels, it's great to ask and get some feedback from them.
Well, here's another thing too. Also, if you're going to judge your techniques, you need to judge them based upon like apples and apples. So for instance, like, I might have a white belt sometimes in class. It's like, man, every time I go for this particular sweep, the purple belt smashes it. I was like, well, of course it's a purple belt. Like if they don't want to play, you can't, like, if a purple belt, if they're decent, your average purple belt, average white belt, because there's obviously exceptions to this rule. We've got Brandon, a 3-time college wrestling champion, who's technically a white belt in our gym, right? For now, but not really a white belt, right? But if you have your average white belt, average purple belt, if the purple belt doesn't want to play, the white belt doesn't move. You know what I mean? Like they can just put the brakes on the whole thing and just start wrecking the person. So most of the time, the purple belt will tend to play around a little bit, right? They'll kind of move a little bit and give them some space. And a lot of times the purple belt against the lower belts, trying new stuff out, figuring things out. And then that gives sometimes the white belt a little chance to, and a little wiggle room to play. Also makes it more fun for them to move. It's I was reading Jordan Peterson's most recent book, and there's a section where he's talking about rats playing, and they were talking about how if a larger rat and a smaller rat are playing, because rats like to play, that if the larger rat does not allow the smaller rat to get the upper hand sometimes, the smaller rat loses his interest and just walks away. And so in turn, to have more time to play, the larger rat will allow the smaller rat to kind of get the better of them sometimes, and they tend to play longer, right? And so we humans kind of do this, naturally anyway, too. Like we kind of like sometimes give people a little something, kind of let them work something sometimes, especially after we've got enough skill under our belt. But if you're a white belt, you should be judging your techniques against other white belts, not higher belts, because it's just, they're at a different skill level. Once you're at a certain skill level or like years of experience, then you can be like, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah.
But you should be judging it around people that are of similar skill levels as you. That's the best place to do it. Because otherwise, again, it's not to say that you couldn't develop a technique that would work against a purple belt as a white or blue belt, because of course you could, but especially if it's something new that you're trying out and you're trying to work on, you don't want to beat yourself up because you're trying to use a technique against a superior grappler. It's a bad recipe.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bad recipe for how you're going to feel about your game and even how to judge it. Because you could be getting great with a technique. You might be hitting all the white belts with it, and you're a white belt, or if you're a blue belt, you're hitting all the blue belts with it, but then the blue belt tries to use it on a black belt, and it's like, oh man, it doesn't work against the black belt. It sucks. No, it doesn't suck. It just means that we have some work to do with it still, and we're a grappler that's becoming better anyway, so eventually we'll probably get it there. I mean, like my double underpass, when I was a blue belt, I couldn't use it on a black belt to save my life. Now I can hit black belts left and right with a double underpass and the variations that I figured out because I became a better grappler over time. So it's an important lesson, I think, sometimes, because I think sometimes people can get down on themselves or even sometimes misinterpret what's happening when they roll with a more experienced grappler.
Yeah. That, and then age too, you got a young person versus an older person or somebody that's way more athletic. You got to kind of, compare apples to apples. There's not just belt ranks. Also, there's time. Yeah. And then you got these kind of freaks, these athletic freaks like Brandon, who is, you're like, oh, okay. All right, sir. I know what you're up to.
Yeah.
But the thing about Brandon, I'll tell you, I actually enjoy rolling with him because he's very, he's like an open book, man. He's trying to learn, very willing to learn. And he's not like, just like, I'm not going to smash. He's just not trying to smash people. He's actually learning and he's playing off his back and cool things like that, which is fun. It's fun for, I think, for everyone that that trains with them. You just don't want to train with somebody and get smashed the whole time. And then that's the whole thing with like black belts, or purple belts going against white belts. So everybody's trying to make it fun, right? You don't want to just smash the white belt every time and then they just never come back and can miss out on something that could be really, really helpful and worthwhile for them. Like
I mean, some gyms have that culture. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I mean, our gym doesn't, but I mean, there's some gyms that have that culture. Like I've been to them before and you're like, man, like, this is pretty rough for these guys coming in, and I mean, and the people that stick are very, very tough people, and they may take pride in that. That's fine. I'm just not that person. I've seen several guys that came into the gym over the years that would be what I would consider like a diamond in the rough, where, they come in and they don't look like much. But someone takes a liking to them, helps them out a little bit, takes them under their wing, fast forward a couple years, whatever, and they're friggin' monsters. Mm-hmm. And it's like, dude, those people, like, there's people out there that if you give them a chance and you just give them a little bit of acknowledgement and tutelage, these dudes can become those ultra, ultra tough people. But if you put them into the meat grinder too soon, it's not likely to happen.
Yeah, I agree. And you got to like have I think you being a coach for quite a while and just being around so many people, so many personalities, kind of, I think you have a sense for that now. I think you understand it and you see it. And, and that, I think that's part of like, even like the women's program growing, like I think you have like-minded individuals and you have like support and like people feel comfortable.
We have women.
Yeah.
Well, the women program started to grow because I mean we've got some women that don't care. They'll do whatever classes.
Right.
But then we have some women that want to do the women's only class most of the time.
Yeah.
And that makes sense because again, if you're a woman, you may want to come into the gym and be like, you know what, I'd like to see other people like me doing this, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting. I've noticed a trend where typically if one person comes into the gym that is a particular body type, gender, or any of that kind of stuff, that if they stick around, they become almost like a beacon that if another person comes in that's similar to them, similar size or the same gender, whatever, that they're like, oh, hey, you've done this and you're pretty good at this stuff. I can do this too then because someone's led the way.
Exactly.
Someone has to blaze the trail for people. And again, a lot of times we connect with people that, look like us or that kind of maybe have the same body type as us, and so we look at them and we say, oh, they could do it. I might be able to do this too, and so I've seen, this is, I think, how humans are in general. It's like we're all trying to find a particular way. We're all trying to, anytime we get into an endeavor, whether it's, a career for work or for jujitsu and skill, we're all trying to figure out a way to crack the nut, And when we see someone do something and we see that we think that it's possible we're capable of the same things that they are, maybe because of the way that they look and the background they come from, we have some sort of affinity with them, right? Some sort of connection to them where we feel similar to them. If they've done something, we're like, well, maybe I can do this too.
Yeah.
And so, that kind of thing happens. And so like with our women's program, we've now have several women that are super tough.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely.
And so a lot of women come in and they're like, if they have a question as to whether or not they can be good at this stuff, they look at some of the other women. They're like, oh, I guess I can be because, Madison's in here and she's teaching class and she's tough. And then, we've got Amanda over here. And then there's Sarah, who's a purple belt. And then we've got Kata who just started training with us. She's a brown belt and she rolls with all the guys and stuff. Yeah. And, so we have a lot of women that then can work as models for the other ones to follow. Just like, I remember back in the day when some of the smaller guys would come in and they were training with us. And they would see guys like Justin, they'd be like, oh, well, he's a small guy kicking people's butt. Well, I guess small guys can do this, or, sometimes like you'll notice that some of the bigger guys that come into the gym kind of gravitate towards guys like Rich, like, oh, he's a big guy. So I could probably learn a few things from this guy because he's a big guy too, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that, and then like the environment we set. Yeah, this kind of brings a point. We had the Chewjitsu Camp last weekend or the weekend before.
Last weekend, yeah. At the time of recording this, yes.
Yeah, last weekend. So we had so many new people, white belts, blue belts. We had a couple, like a brown belt and a purple belt, I think, came in, and it was just so cool because everybody, we read some of their posts about like just the environment being welcoming, having just like this really cool vibe, and like it was awesome meeting everyone too. It was just really cool it's almost like the Chewy universe, like universe of Chewy, and like all these people kind of coming in. It's
like comic book characters. And then we got the jiu-jitsu therapist, and then it's like you can meet Adam, and all these different guys that people have seen in videos.
It's super cool. Like it was great meeting people and just like sharing knowledge with them, and also just connecting and but being welcoming, right? Like that wasn't always a thing. Like back in the day, it was like we want the toughest people on the mats. Like it was like we want these people that are like that are really are gonna go through the fire and kind of make it through, and going to another gym, it's like it was, you go in there, we're gonna try to whoop your ass and make sure that you go back to your gym and say, man, they were really tough, or it's almost you're protecting your turf. Now it's like more welcoming. Like you've got this Chewy universe like we talked about, and people are coming in and they're like they kind of feel like they know you, and then they come into our gym and they kind of get to train with you and train with all of us, and it's a more welcoming environment. I think that's part of the evolution of jiu-jitsu that's been really, really positive, is just kind of how cross training has kind of started to be more acceptable, not all the time, but that's part of it. And it seems to be a martial art that's kind of starting to reach more people that may have never tried it before. It was basically seen as a gateway or a prerequisite for MMA.
Right
now, it's not that anymore. Now you can be a sport practitioner, you can do MMA, you can do all this other stuff, and just do it just for your general health and self-protection.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that you can train hard. Like you can train hard and still have a good time.
Absolutely.
Like a lot of times, rolling can at times be a window into what's going on with someone. And I know you felt this before where you roll with someone and you feel a different energy about them.
Yeah.
Depending on the situation. And like today, like one of the guys at the gym was like I could just tell by watching him move around that he wasn't his normal self. And I asked him, I was like, man, what's going on? And he was like telling me about this whole thing that was going on at work. How he was like, I guess a bunch of layoffs happened. He had to let, it wasn't his choice, but he was the bearer of bad news and had to let a bunch of people go. And so it's weighing on him.
Yeah.
And I've walked into gyms and I know by rolling with them, if people are like trying to take my head off to put it up on a plank, to be like, yeah, I beat up this guy, whatever. Or if they're just rolling with me hard because they're just rolling with me hard. I know I can feel the difference.
Yeah.
It's something that's very noticeable. And so, at the gym, we roll hard, like we go hard, but we'll also be the same ones where if like, let's say if we accidentally like elbow each other or something, but, oh dude, you good? Are you good? Or if like, we get into a submission, we'll get to the very end and we're not going to like rip it and try to break your stuff. We're going to roll hard, but we're also going to try to do so within with the best protocols towards safety and camaraderie as possible. Right. And I mean, cause that's the thing. A lot of us have been training together for a long time. We've gotten a little bit older and, things change.
Yeah.
When you're 20, when you're in your 20s, like early 20s, you can have that mindset of I'm here to fight and that's all I'm here to do. You get a little older and it takes on you take on a different relationship with it, and that doesn't make the gym worse. Like I remember seeing someone recently talking about how, it was like there was someone on YouTube and they made a comment talking about like how like essentially like, gyms don't train hard. And that's why like Pedigo's gym is just killing everywhere. Like Daisy Fresh guys are just killing everyone. Right. And they're very good. Right. Daisy Fresh and Heath runs a great program out there. I like Heath and I love those guys, but that's not the right program for everyone. And even Heath would tell you that, right? It's like, this isn't the right program for everyone. This is for select people. That's a different type of lifestyle, It
is.
And it's a different thing. And if you're like, if you're, it doesn't, this is the thing, like it doesn't make it better or worse. It's different. If you're a person that's like, in their late 30s, early 40s, and you're training because it's a way to kind of decompress and like do something tough, or you're like an army veteran or a military veteran who kind of finds this release through it and finds it as a way of connecting with a group of people, but you've got some injuries to you and you can't train ultra hard all the time, then that wouldn't be the best program for you, right? So it just is what it is. And so again, even with that, like you have to find the environment and the program that suits you best, and it doesn't make any of them better or worse. It just means different strokes for different folks. Like what do you need in your life and what would be best suited for you?
Yeah. And what gives you the most kind of like ability to do this long-term? Can you do this long-term in that environment?
If you want to do it long-term.
Yeah.
Because you could say, I just want to win a couple medals and get the hell out of here. I mean, who knows? I mean, I don't think people are like that, but I'm sure they're, again, I'm playing devil's advocate.
I hear you. I understand. And that's, you're going to gravitate to the gyms that are going to fit your needs. And there's no reason that somebody's going to drive to a gym 45 minutes away to an hour away if they hate the people and hate the environment. You do that for the environment, because part of it's the training and part of it's the people. It's a combination. It's a combination. Part of it is the environment. It's like the welcoming atmosphere that you feel. And part of it's like, we've got the best of both worlds. We've got a really welcoming atmosphere. Most of the people know each other. and are genuinely interested in each other's well-being, and will also want to sometimes take each other's heads off, in a controlled and safe way, and that's awesome to have all those things align in one place.
Yep. It was interesting. One of the people that did the camp actually sent me a message and said that, which is unfortunate, they said that it kind of reignited their desire for jiu-jitsu, because at their gym currently, the environment's not been kind of the best what they want. And so they said that they went in and, when they left, they kind of walked away with this renewed sense of desire for jiu-jitsu, because they're like, that was such a fun environment. That's what I would like to find as a person. That's kind of their message that they sent to me. It's like that they want to find that kind of thing. And unfortunately, it's not at their gyms. So they're going to kind of start looking, but that's what they're looking for. They want that. They want to have that tough roll, hard training, but feeling of camaraderie and group cohesion that, a good gym should have.
Yeah, but here's that's unfortunate in a way, but it's very fortunate, because they could have walked away from jiu-jitsu altogether.
Sure.
They would have missed out on this martial art that's been very influential and very helpful for many people. And when you spend some time as a blue or purple belt, whatever belt they are, doesn't matter. We spend some time, effort, blood, sweat, whatever, you've done that. Like, you don't want to just give it up because it's not the right fit. You'll find your right fit somewhere. It's somewhere.
All right, guys. So hope you enjoyed that podcast. Hopefully that's useful to you in your quest to developing a jiu-jitsu game and developing new techniques, and, being a little bit more detached from the failures and the losses that you experience. And so again, hopefully those tips and that podcast helped you. Again, if you haven't given the podcast a review yet and you listen to us, why not? we provide this cool podcast and you get to hang out with us once a week. Why wouldn't you give us a review? I'm trying to guilt trip you there. Now, again, if you're like, I don't want to give them a review, I'm too busy for that, well, then that's okay. But if you'd like to support the podcast, you can do the review. You can just, wherever you guys watch the podcast or listen to the podcast, just go in there and click the review button, and put a little something in there, and we'd appreciate it. Again, it helps the podcast, helps us grow, and it costs you nothing. So it's kind of it's a fair trade, I think. Again, thanks to our sponsors, Charlotte's Web. You can check them out at charlottesweb.com. Promo code is Chewjitsu. Save 15% on the order. And again, try out one of their products and give it a run for a month. See what you think about it. Again, everybody's bodies are different, but I tend to find that when people use the products, more often than not, once they try it, they like them and they want to try them more later. And so again, I've had amazing results from it. I can't say that you will, but give it a try and see what you think. And again, Charlotte's Web is they make some of the highest quality CBD in the market. Everything's third-party tested. They don't use any pesticides on their crops. It's an amazing product. EpicRollBJJ.com. Thanks to our sponsor, Matt at Epic Roll. And you can go to his website, again, at EpicRollBJJ.com, and you can use a promo code Chewjitsu to save 15% on the order for any jiu-jitsu-related T-shirts, gear, rash guards, shorts, everything. I mean, like I'll go to his website right now. I feel like he's got like jiu-jitsu everything.
It's got underwear too, I think.
Has he got underwear?
I think so.
I need to get some underwear and
he's got like mugs. Pretty cool. They change colors. It's like, all right. Get it, Matt. Matt's got all kinds of stuff.
They change color?
Yeah, like with the heat. The heat of the liquid like changes the color of the mug. That's
pretty neat.
Voodoo, baby.
He's got this new T-shirt. It's like the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fortune teller. That's pretty dope.
Yeah,
it's
got like cards.
Yeah, it's like looks like the tarot cards, and it's got like the leg locker, the wrestler, and that's super dope. If you've ever seen like those old tarot cards where they they have like the Joker or the King or the Death or whatever it is, that kind of stuff. It's that kind of artwork. He's so damn creative. I wish I was creative like him. A bunch of really cool stuff. So again, I'm for the most part, I'm a big fan of all the stuff that he makes. I'm a big fan of all the gear. Everything's pretty cool. And again, he's got those slick Velcro-less shorts that I'm big on those because they're so darn comfortable. And so, yeah, anyway, check his stuff out at epicrollbjj.com. I'm sitting here looking through his webpage right now. And I'm like, wow, this is so super cool. Promo code is Chewjitsu, 15% off. And thanks to our sponsor, Manscaped, manscaped.com. If you're looking for something for yourself or for the man in your life, you can check them out. They are the premier men's below the belt grooming. And again, they make other things like cologne and stuff like that. And all of it is amazing. You can go to their website at manscaped.com. Promo code is Chewjitsu20. You save 20% off the order and you get free shipping. It's a sweet deal. And also, guys, in case you want to check out our Patreon, we have the Patreon, which is at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. On the Patreon, we have everything from videos, of course, from the podcast and little clips from each one of the guests that we've had with each one's with a specific jiu-jitsu related tip. And then we also include some things like rolls. There's some narrated rolls where I break down what I'm doing in particular training sessions or particular competitions. There's also some behind the scenes training footage, like from competition camps that I was training at, or even my classes. And we even have some like warm up and stretching videos in there as well that you can check out. And so again, if you guys want to get any and all of that, you can go to patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And yeah, that's the podcast for today, guys. Oh, and if you guys want to join the True Crew email list, I'll keep this one short. Chew Crew email list. You can go to chewjitsu.net/JOIN. For joining, you will get access to my newsletter that I send out usually Monday through Friday, and you'll get access to a game plan guide and a drilling ebook. If you think it would be a good idea to have a game plan for your jiu-jitsu, which I think it would be, the game plan guide will help you. And if you think it would be a good idea to have a better understanding of how to drill techniques to learn them more effectively, which again, I think it would be a pretty wise idea. That's why I create the books for free for you guys. You can get it at that ebook by going to jujitsu.net/join. So that is the show. I appreciate you guys for being here this week. It's been fun. So with that said, we'll talk to you next week.